Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
Speaker for the day. We'll be bringing up Copter Ruangrojanin. He'll be talking on Fractal, the need for comprehensive industry analysis of the psychedelics ecosystem. Copter is a venture capital professional. He has worked across different startup ecosystems, ranging from fintech to transportation platforms. He's a scientist by training. He's passionate and interested in the biological processes of psychedelics and its therapeutic benefits. Copter, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to Psyched.
Well, thank you so much, Merrick. I'm very excited to be here. And hi, everyone. Hope that everybody is enjoying the conference so far and staying safe. Again, my name is Copter, and before we move on to topic discussion, I just want to briefly introduce myself, talk a little bit about my background, as well as my experience in this amazing community. So I was actually born and raised in Thailand, and I moved here to the States for college, where I went to the University of California, Berkeley. And being in the Bay Area and surrounded by a lot of tech people, I have taken interest in the startup and venture capital community. I had the opportunity to work at different startups and VC firms across Southeast Asia. And at the same time, I bumped into TRV, and I was really interested in the idea of a psychedelic conscience VC firm. My initial impression was that, oh, this is very interesting. I was well aware of Silicon Valley's microdosing culture, and being in Bay Area and being in Berkeley, the general idea of tripping on acid. And so I thought to myself, I could definitely leverage my science background, learn and contribute more to this community, and here I am. And I guess like many other college students, aside from marijuana, I did try a couple of things here and there during my college years, but at the time it was much more of fulfilling my own personal curiosity, and I didn't really understand its therapeutic benefits or aware of the profoundness of it. And one of the things that led me into this ecosystem is the idea that it's driven by this collective mission of healing the world and the people. There is still a lot of stigma, but I think part of the mission here is to help educate and raise awareness to the people. And I think, to me, psychedelics is all about compassion, empathy, and bringing people together as one. And so that's why I'm really grateful to be a part of this community and help push forward this ecosystem in a very healthy and ethical manner. So enough about myself. I'll be sharing my screen. So I hope that everybody is seeing my screen share, right?
Yep, you're good.
So during this conference, it is such a wonderful opportunity for me personally to be able to hear about the different ideas from startup founders, healers, artists, activists, nonprofits, and science who are all working very hard to push the growth of this community. And one of the main ideas that is being echoed throughout the conference is that there is a significant amount of research, clinical trials that is going on. We all know that there are significant improvements in the realms of scientific research, and these are just one of the many major clinical trials that are currently taking place right now. Johnson & Johnson apparently is the only company to have Spravato rolled out and approved. But there are also other players in the field that are showing signs of significant growth. But the important thing here is that the psychedelic ecosystem has now reached a point where psychedelics are being officially integrated into society, whether through psychedelic assisted therapy, retreats, or even consumer packaged goods. We know more about the science than before, but there's definitely still a lot of work to be done. And based on clinical trials, but we also have to understand other aspects of this ecosystem. Perspectives from policymakers, startups, founders, investors should also be represented. So we definitely should start asking ourselves different questions as we move towards this new wave of the psychedelic ecosystem, such as, are all the startups just doing research and development? Are there any lessons to be learned from the missteps of the cannabis ecosystem? So I would like to spend the rest of my time here discussing briefly on how there's also a new ecosystem that is forming within the psychedelic community before talking more about the platform TRV has been working on over the past years and how it is intended to push forward this community. So we invited over a number of speakers in the psychedelic space. Some of them are pioneering new generation drug development. Some of them are pioneering new generation cultivation technologies. And we are already starting to see this diversification in the ecosystem that stems out from traditional R&D. And to put this growing ecosystem into perspective, there are 8 sectors that are growing. So I've also included examples of different startups within that sector. Before we move on, I would like to remind everyone that these startups and organizations are not affiliated with TRV, and they only serve to give you an overview of how robust each ecosystem is. So when you talk about this growing microsector, there is no way that we can avoid mentioning drug development. It still remains the heart and soul of this ecosystem for obvious reasons, and it is by far the largest of all microsectors. And most of these companies target a wide range of neurological disorders, including schizophrenia, PTSD, depression, addiction, and also other more. But at the same time, we also start to see a general trend in drug development, of which mental disorders are focused on the most. And most startups are focused on treatment-resistant depression and major depressive disorders. And it really makes sense if you look at the data. There's no doubt that depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide, with roughly 340 million people suffering from major depressive disorders and another 100 million people suffering from treatment-resistant depression. And some of the major players that all of you might have heard include Compass Pathway, MindMeds, and even nonprofit organizations such as MAPS and Usona Institute. But there are also other players in the field that are also help to push forward this new effective psychedelic medication, such as Bright Minds. Bright Mind Bio is focusing on cluster headaches. You also have Lucis, which is harnessing the anti-inflammatory effects of psychedelics. And the drug development sector is definitely growing each day. If you look at the global drug discovery market, it was valued at $35.2 billion in 2016. And in 2025, it is expected to grow to an estimated of $71 billion. And while the global depression drug market is expected to surge from around $15 billion to $17 billion by 2021. And growth in both sectors represents that new opportunities are emerging, and those figures also correlate with this acceleration of the psychedelic market. Psychedelics are also changing the way how medical practitioners approach mental health illnesses, how patients heal with their own traumas, or even how people biohack to become much more focused and productive. So I think there's a lot going on, and I'm pretty excited about what's to come in the next few years in terms of drug development. Next are cultivations. So these cultivation companies are companies that harvest, they produce and grow raw plants that are necessary for the synthesis of GMP-approved compounds. And many players in the cultivation sectors are developing new technologies that are allowing for much more cost-efficient methods that can yield higher growth rates or do not require manual labor, or they're constructing large-scale mushroom cultivation facilities. And if you look back 5 to 6 years ago, there was no demand for GMP-approved psilocybin. Getting a hold of psychedelic compound is neither easy nor cheap, especially for scientists. They're paying roughly around $7,000 to $10,000 for a gram of psilocybin, whereas the street price is just $10 per gram. And the high cost of psilocybin is actually due to the processes that are involved in synthesizing these compounds. So these synthesized compounds must meet a certain standard, which is set by the FDA's Good Manufacturing Practices, or GMP regulations. And as a result, in the past, there was little commercial interest for companies to synthesize their own compounds, but things have definitely changed. We're already seeing a demand in GMP-approved psilocybin, which can be used for a lot of consumer packaged goods, such as beauty products, supplements, and in food and beverages. And I think part of this growth is attributed to the fact that consumers are just becoming much more aware of their health, and that they're basically seeking new ways to enrich themselves with supplements, superfoods, for example. And also, there's also a demand coming from R&D companies to research more on these medications. And speaking of consumer packaged goods, and these are the companies that focus on, as mentioned earlier, beauty products, foods, and beverages that they infusing with these compounds. And there is definitely an increasing demand for nutritional and fortifying food additives, as well as adoptions of superfoods. So these factors really drive the growth in the CPG and in the cultivation sector. Food and beverage manufacturers are incorporating much more vitamins, minerals, and other additives in their products to basically meet the demands of consumers who are much more becoming aware of their health and well-beings. And I just want to draw out the data from the cannabis market, in particular the global CBD market. So the global CBD market was valued at $4.8 billion in 2018. And if you look at that figure, a lot of psychedelic startups are also starting to take notice of the opportunity that is happening in the CPG sector of the psychedelic ecosystem. And over the years, many startups have launched super teas, psilocybin-infused coffee, even drip coffees and cold brew. And major players like Champion Brands, which have lately been on acquisition spree to expand their CPG portfolios. You also have Four Sigmatics, for example, which is a very large player in this market. But I think the interesting aspect of CPG is that now we already get to see legal jurisdictions popping up in the United States. How are we able to integrate harm reduction when everyone can microdose on a daily basis, or purchasing these products which contains psilocybin? Are they going to be regulated in the same way? So these are some of the things that we should think about, and something we should look for in the future. Next, you also have technology and data companies. These tech companies usually aids in the delivery or analysis of psychedelic assisted therapy. And technology really plays a pivotal role in advancing research and helps improve our lives. Many players in the sector are leveraging its big data, artificial intelligence to analyze and predict market trends. They aid in drug development or even conducting research through computational biophysics. Next, we have intellectual property. Again, these are the companies that are focused on building or accumulating their IP portfolios. And intellectual property is definitely another heart and soul of psychedelic startups. You know, as investments and interest in the ecosystem continues to grow, IP definitely becomes a key consideration. And an extensive IP portfolio, whether in drug development techniques or delivery methods, can significantly give a competitive advantage among other players in the same field. And when we talk about IP portfolio, it's also really hard to avoid the question of how a startup gets patent for its intellectual property. And the United States Patent and Trademark Office, or the USPTO, they regularly grants patents covering psychedelics, and the agency uses the same standard applied to other technologies when they're examining psychedelic patent claims. And till today, there are 52 applications for LSDs that have been published since 2009, since 2001. There are 90 applications for psilocybin, which have been published since 2000, and 127 applications for MDMA have been published since 2001. So investing in IP is definitely an alternative to acquiring other early stage psychedelic startups. It basically provides the acquirer an alternative to generate greater returns in investing in technologies that are relevant in the industry. But the IPO portfolio, the companies focused on IPs, also has some of the challenges too. We also have to ask questions like, how strong can patent portfolios really be when they focus on compounds that are naturally occurring? You can patent natural compounds, but these integration systems or drug development techniques are still drawn from these natural compounds that have been in existence in the public realm for many years. And it also raises another important question of how do you prevent companies from being antagonistic against open science? And I think the ecosystem really needs to find where the balance is in this industry. Next, we have retreat centers and clinics. And the ecosystem is already start to see a growth in these retreat centers and clinics. A number of clinics and therapists are using ketamine to treat depression, both in conjunction with psychotherapy or on its own. And at the same time, a number of retreat centers are offering legal psychedelic experience around the world. And before this, most psychedelic experiences are usually underground. But as perception towards psychedelic continues to shift, there are much more retreat centers and clinics. People are looking to improve their wellness mentally, physically, and spiritually. But most of these retreat centers are located outside of the United States and operate in legal jurisdictions such as in the Netherlands and Jamaica, whereas clinics can also be found throughout the United States. And the only difference between retreat companies are the duration of retreats, accommodations, and their integration system, which are usually specific to that person. But with many cities following the same path as Oakland and Denver to decriminalize psilocybin, and with Oregon initiative coming up later this year, I think we can also expect to see more clinics coming out as well, because there will be an easier access to psychedelic assisted therapy. Next are media companies. So these media companies can either be for profit or nonprofit. They basically provide you information regarding harm reduction, industry insights, and psychedelic news. And these media companies are really important in spreading awareness around psychedelics and delivering the latest news in the community. Many nonprofits are also involved in providing these accurate information about what is going on in the ecosystem. At the same time, we also start to see a rise in public relations and marketing agencies that focus on psychedelics. And these agencies help startups tell their stories to the consumers who matter to them the most. They also play a big part in helping to push legalizations and decriminalization campaigns. So they essentially work with a broad range of entities, businesses, brands, nonprofits, foundation, association, or a startup. Last but not least, you have health systems. So these are the companies that are developing health insurance and other infrastructure for health system that wish to provide individuals with easier access to psychedelic assisted therapies. And most of the players in this specific field, they're pioneering new clinical care models. They're often building a new technology healthcare ecosystem to support clinical psychedelic treatment by designing scalable clinics or networks to provide care. And some of them are also providing training platforms for medical practitioners and psychiatrists to equip them with the know-how on psychedelic assisted therapies. And I think one of the questions being echoed throughout the conference is, how can we ensure that everyone will have access to these psychedelic assisted therapies or even these retreats, since most of them are quite expensive and there has yet to be a sustainable care model or insurance model put in place. So I think it's a very interesting field and microsector, and we'll definitely have to see how things go in the future. And with this diverse ecosystem growing and shifting rapidly, it is only natural that this growth attracts more capital investments. But at the same time, I would also like to caution on the influx of capital investments. Consider the followings. In the early days of the cannabis ecosystem, investments were mostly from angels, from high net worth individuals, from small family offices, and small cannabis-specific VC funds, and all of which have an understanding of the cannabis ecosystem. Now, there are just a larger and more sophisticated players. You have larger established VCs, institutional capital coming into the space, and deal flows for cannabis have recently declined significantly. And it really implies that the cannabis has been commercialized on a massive scale and that everybody wants a piece of it. It also means that cannabis startups are also starting to become much more selective in finding their capital. They want investors who can potentially add value to the ecosystem rather than just pouring in money. So with that in mind, we also want to ensure that this capital influx that is going to happen in the psychedelic ecosystem does not violate the ethical and the humanistic aspects that are intrinsic to the community. It also raised an important question that as we pride ourselves as a venture capital firm with a conscience, how can we continue to push the growth of this ecosystem, supporting startups and investors, traditions and cultures in a very healthy and conscious manner that is aligned with this collective mission to heal the world? And I think this is definitely where our platform comes in. You know, over the past few years, TRV has been building out one of the very first psychedelic startup databases called Fractal. So we have been compiling a list of startups and companies in the psychedelic ecosystem. Some of them are public, some of them are private, and even some operating stealth mode. We aim to provide Fractal as a tool for both entrepreneurs and investors to give them exposure and help them understand the ecosystem better and answer questions such as, what are the other startups doing? How many opportunities are there in the field? And what can I do if I want to invest alongside TRV? From an outsider investor perspective, our Fractal database provides an in-depth overview of what the startup is doing, its current funding stage, its founders' contact information, pitch decks, even career listings, analytics on how the startup in a specific microsector is doing compared to the rest. There are definitely a lot of other platforms out there in the market, such as PitchBook, CB Insight, Crunchbase, AngelList, to name a few. But keep in mind that most of these platforms are not industry specific, or that they cost way more than they should. And we believe that access to this valuable information as part of promoting this growing ecosystem should be free or affordable to everyone. We're also in partnership with WeFunder, which will allow investors to participate in crowdfunding of a startup that they're interested in. We have also launched a syndicate, which will allow investors to invest alongside with us. And moreover, we're planning to integrate Your Stake into our platform. What Your Stake is that it's an online petition platform for share owners. If you invest in a company, for example, this tool allows you to convince companies to support a cause that you believe in. For instance, closing the gender pay gap or promoting diversity and inclusion from a workspace. Now, you've already heard from an investor perspective. And now, what can Fractal provide to entrepreneurs? Now, from an entrepreneur startup founder perspective, we want to provide them with the exposure to the community. And the other day ago, one of our speakers stated that there are only 2 female CEOs in this ecosystem, but our database actually found out that there are altogether 31 female founders and CEOs in the space. There are of course more, and part of this mission here is to help find them and support them. But if we weren't publicly sharing these numbers, those female entrepreneurs may not have gotten the investments and the exposure needed to help them grow. And I think in a world where only 2.2% of venture-funded startups have female founders, that really matters. The diversity and the inclusion really matters. We're also planning to integrate a CRM platform for startups on our database to track different metrics and analytics, how investors are interacting with the startup profiles, where the investments and capital are currently focused on. And startups can also use this platform to attract talents, where if they choose to opt in, they can provide career listings on their sites. And as part of a conscience and impact-focused goal, we're also pushing the North Star initiative. So North Star will allow stakeholders as movement to co-create a sustainable culture, code of ethics, and guiding principles in this community to build a more just, equitable, and connected world. And another feature as part of Fractal that I'm really, really excited and proud to announce is our comprehensive research paper on this growing psychedelic ecosystem. It is truly one of a kind ecosystem insight research that we've been working on over the past year, and is scheduled to launch by the summer. what differentiates this paper from the rest is that it just goes beyond the current landscape of all scientific endeavors and delves into different policies, different microsectors, different opportunities, and diving deep into the FDA processes, case studies of different startups, and even the juxtaposition between psychedelics and cannabis. And to really push forward this movement, it is very important to provide the public with an in-depth industry insights, shine a different light on this beautiful and robust ecosystem, and basically engage everyone in this conversation. Now you have heard all about Fractal, I would like to show you a preview of Fractal. So this is this is a preview of our Fractal page. As you can see, there are reports and companies, and if you click the companies, it basically gives you a list of the companies that are operating in the psychedelic space. But just a reminder to everyone that these are one of the many companies that we have on our platform. And let's say we click on, I don't know, Speak AI, for example. So it gives you the logo, a small description of what the company is doing, the founders, and if you click on the founder, it redirects you to the LinkedIn page, and you also have a media link if you want to see if the startup is being talked about by any news media outlet. And just a reminder to everyone that this is a preview of our starter package, but we also have different subscription tiers from starter to basic and then pro. And as you move up the tiers, you basically get much more insights into the company. For example, if you move to the basics, you don't get a small description of what a startup is doing, but you get our take on what the company is doing, its metrics. You also get pitch deck, access to their presentation, as well as their contact information. Yeah, so I think that's it from my end. And thank you very much. I'm not sure if there's any time for Q&A.
Thanks so much, Copter. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see you again?
Yeah, just give me a moment. I'm having a difficult time trying to end the screen share. Ah, found it.
Wonderful.
Can you see me now?
Yes, you're good, man. So just a heads up to folks, both Copter and I have been working on Fractal for a while, so we're going to answer some of these questions together. But just to start off, Del, yes, we can send you the presentation. Next question from Rebecca. Where do you think the demand for these medicines is coming from? Copter, do you want to answer that one?
The demand from these medicines, I think it's coming from everyone and people who just want to experience, people who are curious, and I guess more importantly, people who are suffering from these mental health conditions. There is definitely an unmet medical need in mental health illnesses. Antidepressants are not effective in helping these patients. There are many research out there that suggests that 50 to 60% of people who rely on antidepressants, they actually experience relapse of symptoms or even suicide. So I think there's really a demand coming from those groups, and also, and like I mentioned earlier, people who are just curious, or people who are becoming much more aware of their health. People who want to try these superfoods, they want to try a microdose to be much more productive and focused.
Mm-hmm. The second question I can take, Rebecca, you've been asking really great questions, and I would encourage you, if you'd like to reach out to us. Here, I'm just going to post my email here so we can continue the conversation, because I can tell that there's a lot more to chat about as well. But yeah, do you include the nonprofit spiritual groups and community efforts in your ecosystem? So in our description of ecosystem, yes. So for instance, our research reports do include information on kind of the nonprofit aspect, intersections with indigenous groups and considerations that need to be taken there, community efforts like psychedelic societies and what that culture looks like. In terms of the Fractal database, though, the companies that are actually listed there are no nonprofits listed there unless they have some sort of for-profit arm. But it's really, Fractal is at least the database component is based much more on entrepreneurship, companies that are looking for capital investment in some form or another. But the reports do have a much more comprehensive overview, which is also part of the platform. So both yes and no. Qualitatively, yes. I guess quantitatively, database wise, no. So Greg asks, what micro sectors do you think are a good fit for venture capital? Copter, do you want to take a swing?
Yeah, I think for my personal opinion, I think the micro sector that is really fit for venture capital is drug development, because it remains the heart and soul of this ecosystem, and there's still a lot to discover behind the science of how these psychedelic compounds actually interact with your body. And if you look at other micro sectors, there are also some of the issues and challenges that we have to answer. For example, in the personally for me, in the CPG market, like I mentioned before, how are we able to integrate these harm reductions or prevent people from microdosing on their own? And some of these people it's even their first time doing it. So I think I would definitely focus on drug development. I think you're on mute.
I would encourage anyone, thank you for that. I would encourage anyone who's looking for a deck right now to just send us an email. Again, that email address that I posted in the chat for Rebecca, that's open to anyone who's looking for the deck as well. Just ping us, and we can get you the deck if that's what you're interested in. But Copter, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for speaking to the Fractal Project. Really appreciate it, and it's been a complete pleasure building it alongside you. So thank you.
I really appreciate it too.
Okay, I'll talk to you later, man. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon.